evil, is evil moral or is it pragmatic, utilitarian? Is evil perversion of God's justice and holiness, or is evil just something in a system that produces class binaries? Well, according to Jesus and the whole Bible, the whole Word of God, but remember when Jesus talks about where evil comes from, the heart? Well, then we need a new nature. We need a new heart. So the gospel from Genesis 1:1 to Revelation, end of Revelation, it's going to be dealing with what? With my sinful heart. But if evil is just a archaic word for benefiting some and not others at the cost of others, and it's systemic only, it's found in the system, well, then every one of us are just victims of the system, no matter what part we're on. And so the gospel, the good news, needs to be one that deals with systemic problems. All right? And again, please, let's be careful with the pendulum. That pendulum is very scary. And I need to say this to myself a lot too. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as systemic problems. That we see different worldviews, even in the American system. There are some things that are systemically unjust. But the question ultimately is, where's the source? Where's the source of it? And a lot of what's called injustice, according to God, the only one who counts, it's not injustice. So we need to be very careful with all that. But that's the difference between social gospel and gospel. And this is nothing new. And the downgrade controversy with Spurgeon, his main opponent had an essay about social gospel and started going that way. And then Spurgeon's number one disciple in the States starts dealing with that as it's growing in the States. There's a type of social gospel at the end of the 19th century going into the early 20th century that was happening among even Baptists. And now that's why today, if you go to the Baptist Union website in England, you'll see they even have LGBTQ pastors among them. And there's no declaration of whether that's right or wrong, but it's just permitted. Anyways, so now Marx, as a historical determinist, was optimistic. All right, remember, we're going in a deterministic way towards utopia. It means you're an optimist. We're not going from utopia to chaos. We're going from chaos to utopia. Not everybody was as optimistic as he is, and one of the ones that said, well, actually, this could be bad for a while, and I think people aren't really thinking what they're saying, is Friedrich Nietzsche. And this German philosopher, ex-seminary student, he said, no, this is actually going to wake us up to the truth of nihilism, of that if we're all just historically determined and this is going this direction, then life is just despair. There's no ultimate purpose or meaning. And so that doesn't mean he's pro-Christian either. He's atheist. But in his book, The Gay Science, in 1882, he has a parable that I think probably everybody here has heard of. It is quoted everywhere. The madman, Nietzsche's madman, right? And in this parable, you have this madman with a lantern running into the town. He's yelling, where is God, where is God, where is God? And it says the people are staying there in the town square, which represent the rationalists from the Enlightenment. Since they don't believe in God, he says, since they don't believe in God, they started mocking this crazy man. Man, this guy's, he's nuts. And so they start mocking him. Oh, where is your God? You lost him? Is he hiding? And then the madman says, I'll tell you what's happened to him. We've killed him, you and me. And then he starts going into this rant about how did we erase the horizon? What did sailors use the horizon for back then before they had GPS? You know, the direction where we're going as a standard of the one unmovable thing that we're going to use as our standard for looking for direction. How did we break like the chains that keep us orbiting the sun? How did we do all that? And he says it's more or less, and what we have done today will be looked back in the future as something terrible. And he goes into this rant, and then these people are just in the square, they're staring at him like, man, this guy needs help. And then he sees their reaction. He takes his lantern, tosses it on the ground, and says, I came too soon. He said, you know, when a lightning flashes, there is time between you see it and when you hear it. Because you know the speed of light is much faster than the speed of sound. And he says, so many things that happen, it takes time for you to see the results. And he is prophesying, you cannot say God is dead without killing him first. You can't just say there's no God and we're just going to keep going, because we're all assuming things that only exist, categories, if God exists. There's no good or evil, so what's going to happen to our society? And so the rationalists had not yet grasped the consequences of the philosophical death of God. And then so somebody, you can't just say there's no God. Somebody or something has to take its place, because we need some kind of horizon. And he says, you know, man will have to take God's place and invent a new morality, this Superman, Übermensch, which Hitler then uses that idea for the Aryan race. And the madman had arrived too early. Well, so you need to first, to get rid of God, you need to first kill God, and then you need to desacralize man. He's no longer sacred. And that's the whole idea behind Carl Trueman's newest book, the desecration of man. And he gives 3 steps to that. And again, because I know he's working this way, I add one. Again, if he was here, I'd say, I'm so sorry, brother. I'm not trying to say I know something you don't, but you already said this when you're writing it, so you just didn't put it here. The first thing is eliminate God. And Nietzsche said you can't just eliminate him, you have to kill him, you have to replace him. And then here's where Nietzsche comes. I mean, here's where Carl Trueman comes in and says, here's the first step. Eliminate human exceptionalism by turning humans into mere animals. You have to turn humans into just a mere products, animals. Take away the imago Dei, that they are the crest, they are the top of God's creation. Then humans need to start to treat other humans as objects, not beings with intrinsic worth and power. And this is discussed a lot in the sexual revolution. This is finally going to give women especially liberty. No, it turned them into objects. Think about it. Before you have a sexual revolution, think about that. I can't just look at a woman and say, just an opportunity to fornicate. I have to also think about covenant. I have to think about children, society, or what God's going to think about that. It's not just an object, a woman. There's a whole covenant aspect, and it points to Christ and his church, and then children are produced by this. And now it's like, no, it's all free, and women now they're just objects. And that's the opposite of what they were saying they wanted to do with the sexual revolution. And then you have to produce this belief that humans are capable of creating their own ends in the absolute or final sense. And that's existentialism, atheistic existentialism from Jean-Paul Sartre, which I'll show you. Now, I'm going to read to you part of the madman, Nietzsche's madman, of this parable. At the end of his rant, Nietzsche writes this. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern to the ground and broke into pieces and went out. I have come too early, he said then. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. Everybody's celebrating. We don't believe in God anymore. When they really start believing what they're saying they believe, it's going to be tragedy. And yeah, it was a pretty good prophecy, actually, from a non-believer, because the 20th century had over, 200 million people killed in genocide and war. That's much more than the 19 previous centuries combined. The theoretical repudiation of Christian orthodoxy by the intellectual elites takes time to work its way out into the broader dynamic of the culture. There will be a time lag between the desecration of God and the desecration of men. And now what we're seeing is a desecration of men. Man is no longer sacred. Now, not everybody was we're just materialistic, we're just genes. Well, they didn't have the word genes then. Actually, Francis Crick, not until 1953 did we learn about the double helix structure of the DNA. But we're just this material, we're just this matter. Not everybody, and I think Nancy Pearcey, I do enjoy reading her, by the way. I think my favorite book from her is Saving Leonardo. If you have not read this, boy, do yourself a favor, and you're going to go on a ride. She says, there was a dark side, however, to the Enlightenment worldview. And this is what I think Nietzsche was also pointing to. For if nature was a machine running by natural laws, the implication was determinism, what I just showed you. See, I taught you all this before we look at the quote. The doctrine that everything is controlled by the implacable laws of nature. There is no freedom, no creativity, no moral responsibility, because if we're all just machines, you don't pick between one another, you're just the marionette, right? Nature seemed cold and dead. All this is just so cold and dead. This goes so much, it contradicts the human experience, that we're just robots. And so there's another movement growing at the same time as rationalism, which we call romanticism. Rationalism is only logos, objective truth. Romanticism is only thing that's important is pathos, my subjective feelings and experiences. That's what gives me an understanding of essence, identity, purpose. And Rousseau was one of the big names there. If you read some American history, you see what he has written is very influential in the American mindset of liberty. That's not to say, that's not a jab against freedom, but it is help us say, by everything that comes from the mindset that's not a biblical worldview, be careful with it. This idea that people are best guided by not authority, ethos, not logic, not rationality, logos, but by feelings, pathos. Human free will is the capacity to pursue goals and objectives based on our emotions. Religion divides and weakens society. Humans are born good and are only corrupted by society. We are free, moral, creative beings. We are not determined. We're free, moral. I can choose. It's all free will. Man is seen chained up everywhere, so we must break that so we can have that freedom we all deserve. I'm starting to sound very patriotic with that. I'm just saying, notice the connection there. And in this romanticism, this is what psychologists calls expressive individualism. And Truman uses that term a lot in his writings. The idea that individuals come to define themselves by their feelings. I identify as a woman, even though what you see is biologically male. See where that idea comes in? My experiences, my feelings give me really my identity. You're starting to connect that to what we're seeing today? Well, so now you have this debate between, okay, what is true? The objective, logical, cold facts, or feelings, experiences, subjectivity. Well, at least we know authorities know. It's going to be anti-authority on both sides. But which one has the day? And there's going to be a friction between these two going on. That is by part the fault of Immanuel Kant. If you ever heard the term Kantian dualism, that's this. He taught that we're free, moral beings, but also what led to determinism, and you cannot make those two make sense. And this divide between rationalism and romanticism, I think I've understood this best thinking, hey, this sounds like something I saw in my childhood, a series. Captain Kirk and Spock. Remember? Vulcans are rationalists. It's all logic. Well, don't you feel that is not logical? It's just cold, objective logic facts. And then Captain Kirk, boy, he was the biggest romanticist in the world. See, he's just following his heart for any alien girl in each episode. As a child, maybe 7 years old, I learned what it looks like to kiss a woman. Just watching that, because he has to kiss a woman in every part of that series I saw. And again, I don't have to read all this every time, but this is just Nancy saying, and this is the problem Kant had. He taught both, but he could not reconcile them. You can't have determinism at the same time and have free will and moral choices. And that's why today, and children will learn about this in university, it's called Kantian dualism. They have not been able to reconcile these two. Well, we come into the 20th century, we get into World War I, and well, we're not really going into utopia, are we? It's getting bad. And Marxism's starting to have some faults in it. And you start noticing that. Think of the realism in literature in the U.S. in that part of the century, in the 1930s. John Steinbeck of Mice and Men, 1937. The Grapes of Wrath, 1939. There's no happy ending. Realism. And you just enjoy the book, and it's just describing, there's really no purpose to the end of it. There's no justice. It's just, you see this pessimistic idea coming out in that, because that's what they're going through in this time. The big deception of what we call logical positivism, man going into this. Man is now the God of this whole universe, and we're going to do it better than Jehovah and Muhammad and all the Eastern. Man is going to be the new one, and now we're going to finally go into getting rid of all of this oppressive religious old systems that just promote feudalism. We came in the 20th century, and did we go into utopia? It's a mess. It was a mess. And then, well, the most industrialized countries are going to go into this communism. Well, one of the most industrialized was Germany, and they didn't go into a global communism. They went to a nationalistic fascism, the total opposite. And they started persecuting these Jews. And so a group of Jewish academics come together between World War I and World War II and form what we call the Frankfurt School. And they have a very legitimate pursuit. What's going on with this growing fascism that they're only a few years away? They're going to get kicked out of the country. They're going to run to Geneva and then run to Manhattan, and Columbia University is going to take them in. And then that's how it goes throughout the states, this teaching. Critical theory. Okay? So Max Horkheimer becomes president in 1930 of the Frankfurt School, coins this term critical theory in an essay. And what he says is there's traditional theory that describes the world. You go from Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all the way up to Hegel in philosophy, and they're just describing the world. They're not promoting, not pushing anything to happen. They're not activist pushing. And from Marx on, you're not describing anymore. You're going to change the world with what you're teaching. There's an agenda with everything we're going to put in, a Marxist agenda. And that's critical theory. We're going to deconstruct history, deconstruct language, deconstruct laws, and show how, even religion, and show how everything has something in it that had an agenda to give privilege and power to people. And we're going to deconstruct it. You've heard of deconstructing history. And they also are going to attack rationalism, not just religion. And so even mathematics are discriminatory. Even science is discriminatory. The scientific method is fake. Barry never went to space. He's in this Hollywood basement with a green screen. It's all a big conspiracy theory. Scientific method is not even real. And you see, these people, are they crazy? No, it's because, think about what did rationalism produce? Determinism. If everything's predetermined, then groups who are oppressed, the universe predetermined them that way. Why don't they just accept that? And so, we got to attack rationalism because it's saying that people are determined to be part of the oppressed. And so, well, I just said all this. So truth is not, and somebody needs to remind me of the time again. I'm sorry. I did it again, by the way. What time did we start? Okay, good. Okay, my goal is by 10 more minutes, I'm now starting to go into the practical. No more of this. Truth is not a matter of statement corresponding to reality. Truth is what subverts the status quo and moves society in the right direction. Everything has to have an agenda to promote revolution. Do you see that? And here's where, again, David Wells talks about, this is where you have to attack the Enlightenment and rationalism. But I already explained that to you. So, with the Frankfurt School, remember we said that what makes something true or right? Does it promote revolution or does it try to maintain the status quo? Those are your only two categories, indicators. Does it produce this revolution? Well, change by revolution, therefore, you need an ethic that is against all authority, because authority is held by those who are privileging from the system, and they're saying, yes, this is right and wrong, because God wants it that way. When they're really made up a fairy tale God, and they're putting these rules because that's what keeps you in subjection to them, and Marx called that ideology, by the way. And they became Freudian in it. Now, hold on to that. Freud says ultimately, all positive human constructions and even negative are sexually based. If it's negative, it's thanatos, death. If it's positive, it's libido. But everything finally has a sexual reason for it. Sexual repression. So what does that do then? Now, you're going to say, why are you giving us all this? It's because I've heard people say, this book by Truman, this one, The Rise and the Triumph of the Modern Self, it's too hard to understand. Well, I just spent an hour and a half so we could just understand one quote. And all of a sudden, this is going to make sense. Yeah, you're smarter than me. I fought my way through years for this. The rise of the sexual revolution was predicated on fundamental changes on how self is understood. What's self? Identity or essence. The self must first be psychologized. Who said that my identity is found in my feelings? We just talked about that. Romanticism. Express individualism. Who do I know who I am? Well, what does my subjective feelings tell me I am? You must first say that your identity is found in psychology, how you feel. And then you must say that all feelings, psychological feelings, have to be sexual in nature. Who did that? Freud. Therefore, at the end of the day, who are you? Someone will say, I am lesbian. I am gay. The word am is from the verb to be, which is a word of essence, identity. Wait a second, of everything that I do in my life, everything that happens and everything that I am, the only way I can know who I am is my sexual orientation, how I feel sexually. Yes, because you have to first say that my identity is based on feelings and all feelings are sexual. And then now, my identity, I'm added to a group that identifies in the same way. And this group has not been the norm. So everything works against us. So if you say anything against us, against our feelings of identity, it's hate speech. Because you're trying to keep us in the unprivileged group that we've been in. It's all politically understood. Well, Marxism finally fell. In the West and in the East, you see that communism mostly came in through the death of over 100 million people. in agrarian nations. That goes against Marx's predictions. He says it has to happen in industrialized nations. And in the industrialized, he said it'll happen to either England or Germany. England did not go communist, and Germany went the opposite direction, nationalistic fascism. And when we present man as an atomation of reflexes, as a mind machine, as a bundle of instincts, as a pawn of drives and reactions, as a mere product of instinct, heredity, and environment, we feed the nihilism to which modern man is, in any case, prone. I am absolutely convinced, says Viktor Frankl, I'm absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek, I'm probably pronouncing this all wrong, were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks and in the lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. And Nietzsche said this was going to happen. Which group, how can we all say that we all have intrinsic worth? I'm a human being if we said I'm not made in God's image. Ultimately, people are going to start looking at each other, then which group's more important? And Abby, otra agua, please. Thank you. Herman Dewey Verde, somebody I'm reading a lot more of lately, in the secularization of science, says Nietzsche, who had a penetrating insight into the nihilistic consequences of secular science, said that by means of science, man has killed his gods. In his time, it was only a prophecy, since science itself was still venerated as a goddess, who would lead humanity along the way of progress. Thank you, sorry. Truth and freedom. At present, however, that prophecy has come true to a large extent. The faith and the power of science to liberate and to exalt mankind has been undermined and shattered by positivistic historism and vitalism, both of which have emerged as a result of radical secularization of modern thought. And then Wells says, the anchorage that the internal world of the spirit had found in the supernatural order disappeared in the blaze of enlightened attitudes, and the self, identity, essence, now left completely to itself, cut off from God and from the outside world, began to disappear. Once severed from the larger frameworks of meaning, people became increasingly introspective, and what they gazed upon looked increasingly weightless. Rationalism to naturalism, you're determined this way. Who said we're determined to be the oppressed group? Who said? And I've explained a lot of this, so I'm not going to go to all the quotes because I'm not going to hit the time mark. But the point is, the idea comes, who says the scientific method's right? Who says Newton's laws are absolute truth? Who says mathematically? Who says, well, those who are in charge said that was all right and subject us to it. So these feed each other, rationalism and authority. They're all intertwined in a conspiracy. So the only one left is pathos, about the middle of last century, and rationalism has to fall. And rationalism, in large part, has fallen. And Romanticism helped bring in this idea with critical theory and many other things of postmodernism, relativism. That's why people that are our age, they say, there's no such thing as absolute truth. All truth is relative. We're like, okay, were you born yesterday? That is the most logically fallacious statement. I mean, I'm going to be crude. Think, are you dumb? But now you can see what they're trying to do is build this idea of I can't use my subjective experience with truth and impose that on somebody else, because that's what produces class distinctions and oppression. And of course, they say, well, if Marx fell, do we have to go to nihilism? No. Albert Camus said, no, let's not do nihilism. Let's do something called absurdism. Absurdism is saying, yeah, there is no meaning, But in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, he said, but the whole meaning of life is just pushing this rock up there. Well, why are we doing that? Just do it. Shh. Just embrace the absurdity of life and keep that guy happy. And he says, Albert Camus, there is only one truly serious philosophical problem, that is suicide. Judging whether life is worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. Everything else, whether the world has 3 dimensions or not, whether the mind has 9 or 12 categories, comes after. We need to come up with a reason why man should just not commit suicide, because it's all nihilistic. So I'm going to offer you something that's called absurdism. Life is absurd, but just embrace the absurdity. Don't commit suicide, please. And that's what the world has to offer our children, you all. Look at the world's going to liberate them from Christianity that's so oppressive. Life means nothing. Just try not to slit your wrist in the process. That's about all they have to offer our children. But they know Christianity is wrong. But this is the best they've had to come up with so far. Well, we're at the almost 30 mark, and this is where I wanted to get. Should we start taking this down now to men and women? So, this idea of determinism, it promotes essentialism, that somebody is born with a certain essence, identity. And that does not work with postmodern thought. So, all of these, the Bible, materialistic determinism, historical determinism, they all teach, this is who you are, now you're going to live out this way. That sounds too much like a God telling me what to do. So why don't we evaluate these 2 categories and say, maybe we're first just are, and we're becoming what we're supposed to be. And we can, through our own free decisions, create ourselves like we're our own gods. And let's tell you who helped us get there is Jean-Paul Sartre. And well, in writing that book, I studied this whole essay of his piece by piece. I'm like, yes, he's so obvious about it. And what he says is that let's look at the categories of essence and existence. I'm made in God's image, therefore I should live a certain way. Be holy because I am holy, therefore I'm made in God's image. Atheistic existentialism, of which I am representative, he says, declares with greater consistency that if God, greater consistency than the other philosophies, naturalistic philosophies, that if God does not exist, there is at least one being whose existence, what we do, comes before its essence, its identity. A being which exists before it can be defined by any conception of it. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man, first of all, exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and then defines himself afterwards. Man is going to be his own creator. What's the purpose of your life? Ask me in a little bit, and I'll tell you how I'm going to find a way to glory myself. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because to begin with, he is nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus, there is no human nature because there is no God to have a conception of it. In other words, we are not born humans, we become them. Well, you may say, well, what do I care about that? Well, maybe you've heard of his lover, Simone de Beauvoir, another professor at the same university with him. They had an open relationship, and actually she lost her teaching license because she was helping him with sexual things and doing pedophilia with the students. And she wrote, with that idea of his, The Second Sex in 1949. Remember, he says we are not born humans, we become them. Now, look what she uses that. She applies it to gender. One is not born, but rather becomes woman. No biological You know the biological difference between men and women, the most obvious? No psychic, no psychological, no economic destiny defines the figure that the human female takes on in society. It is civilization as a whole that elaborates this intermediary product. Civilization, the society with its evils, oppressive evils, they came up with this idea of what a woman is, and she is just really a eunuch. There are men and there are these eunuchs, and that's a product of society. And this idea, that's where we're getting this idea of gender ideology. It's all a Marxist political thing. That's why you say, okay, is this Supreme Court person, is this person were they born yesterday? Can you tell me what's the difference between a man and woman? Because you're about to force them to say something that's going to get them in political trouble. It's not like they don't know. And then one of her followers is Shulamith Firestone. Radical feminist, 1970 wrote The Dialectic of Sex. The dialectic is what I just showed you with the marks, going back and forth all the way up. And now just notice this, and we're going to start reading all these quotes. Look what she says. So that just as to assure elimination of economic classes, talking about the elimination of economic classes, Marxism, requires the revolt of the underclass of the proletariat. And in temporary dictatorship, Marx said you're going to have a temporary dictatorship that's going to take the control of production and property. And that's what we see in Latin America. We saw happen in Venezuela. It happened in Cuba, where the government comes in and says the state owns everything, has a monopoly on everything. We're going to take control of all capital and production until these classes in our society, they dissolve. There's a classless society, okay? She says, and so there's a temporary dictatorship that has to happen. Their seizure of the means of production so as to assure the elimination of sexual classes, men and women, requires the revolt of the proletariat underclass, which is the women. If we take that to feminism now, and the seizure of control of reproduction. Just as in Marxism, you have to take control of production, women should take control of reproduction. Not only the full restoration to women of ownership of their own bodies, but also their temporary seizure of control of human fertility. Men cannot decide. Every woman needs to decide because it's her body. She needs to take control of reproduction, but she is the next Marxist group. A new population biology, as well as all the social institutions of childbearing and child-rearing. Even men they can't even tell you how to raise a child. We need to take it all from them. And just as the end goal, now listen to this, as the end goal of socialist revolution, Marxism, was not only the elimination of the economic class privilege, but the economic class distinction itself. The end of Marxism was not so the bourgeois people and the proletariat people, they're going to now both classes have things in common. No, it is to erase the classes. Listen to this. So the end goal of the feminist revolution must be also what? Unlike that of the first feminist movement, not just the elimination of male privilege, but of sex distinction itself. The new second, now this is between second, what they call third wave feminist movement, is not to deal with women's rights. It is to say there's no distinction between men and women anymore. Gender ideology. You see what they're doing? It's all a political Marxist idea of where we should be going. So what about these gender differences? And we say, why do we keep saying there needs to be, God made men and women, and actually, and we may think that the gender ideology movement here is only in what we're seeing on TV and these parades and social media. No, actually, and I'm going to say this very delicately, but if it hurts anybody's, if somebody doesn't like it, these pastors here, you can just go to them because I'm leaving tomorrow morning, so they can handle the mess I'm going to make. Gender ideology is even in the conservative church right now. It doesn't flare up with transgender colors all the time. It comes in a lot more quieter as well. If we do not have the same offices or roles between men and women, that's discriminatory also. Because at the end of the day, it's all about me. It's not about how Christ wants to be glorified in his church. We have to have the same everything. Uniformity is the only way to equality. And I believe that's gender ideology as well. Now, what does Genesis say about marriage? Jesus, he quotes Genesis 1 and 2, the answer about divorce. And then he adds commentary so that they are no longer two but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. So what has God joined together? Well, I'm going to tell you something. Genesis 2, even though it talks about Adam and Eve, here's not talking about Adam and Eve. Genesis, because therefore a man shall leave his father and mother. Did Adam leave father and mother and unite to Eve? No. Because of what God did with Adam and Eve, from here forward, man will leave father and mother. So, because people argue, yes, but what happened here is just between Adam and Eve because they need to procreate. We've procreated, now it can be man, man, woman, woman. It doesn't matter anymore. Well, actually, Jesus is answering a question. Did they ask Jesus if Adam and Eve could divorce? Was that the question they asked him? Or are they asking about divorce in Jesus' day? So therefore, Jesus says, but didn't you read that because God made the male and female, and then from there, a man will leave mother and father? Wait, he's not talking about Adam anymore. He's talking about everybody after Adam. And so if it was an answer about who brings marriage together and how, in Jesus' day, 4,000 years after Adam, only 2,000 years later, nothing's changed. So what is the only covenant union that God brings together? One man, one woman for life. No other, he doesn't have to put footnote. That doesn't mean 5 cows and 1 woman. No, he doesn't have to put every other possible combination. He told you what God brings together. And then as we already said, the mystery, even before the fall, alluding to the gospel and the glory of Christ and his church, of why it's hetero. God did not have to make us hetero, by the way. He made the earthworm to be a hermaphrodite. And we could have had asexual reproduction. He's created things that way too. There's nothing intrinsically wrong in that. But God did not want us to reproduce and have that covenant family and extension with the children in that way. You know why? Because from the very beginning, he wanted to start alluding to and continue to point to the glory of Christ and his church and this marriage covenant. So I get that from based off even the creation and Genesis. But what is the world and man's reasoning saying? Well, with what I've shown you, today the world's saying, no, this is not an institution that God brings together. This is something that the state brings together. Therefore, the state can define it because it belongs to the state. But that's not really what I want to talk much about right now. I want to go into the gender for the glory of God. Now, notice that God created Adam in his image, which will include in his image Eve, even though they're not essentially exactly the same in God's image, even though they're both God's image by one text in the New Testament. But I'll leave that for another day. But they're both made in God's image. He created male and female, and Adam in God's image. And God looked at everything he had made, and it was very good. Being created a man is good. Being created a woman is good. For the glory of God. But you go to Genesis 2, and it takes a looking glass into the 6th day of creation, and you see that between the time when God had created man and woman and when God looked at everything and said it was good, there's something that happened before all that happened. God looked at, the Lord said, it's not good that the man should be alone. This is not morally not good, but it's not part of his plan. I will make him a helper fit for him. So in the theology of manhood and womanhood, despite what our society may think, marriage and difference between boys and girls, men and women is good. and marriage is good, family is good. I teach young people there's no such thing as a marriage that's ever brought, a biblical marriage that's ever brought a problem to anyone in their whole life. Oh, you're going too far. No, there are problems in biblical marriages, but it's not because of the marriage, it's because of the two sinners that are in that marriage. Therefore, when I have problems in my marriage, I don't think about, let's kick the marriage dog when I get home frustrated. I need to deal with the sinners, and I can't deal with my wife's sin more than I can deal with my own sin first. But not only are men and women structurally what some people call who they are, essence, imago Dei, God's image, not only are they both valuable, reflect God, worthy of respect, the pinnacle of God's creation. Because of that, not only both men and women have the same dignity and worth, and therefore how we deal with our neighbor and in marriage especially, how do we deal with each other, should reflect these truths of Scripture. Therefore, be very careful what you say to your wife. You're supposed to represent what Christ would say to his church. Ouch. But they were given a mandate. How they're to live out in their, now I'm using the terms of what existence, functions, as God's image bearers. And therefore we go to the functional aspect, what you do to reflect that for God's glory, and what many people call the cultural creation mandate, however you want to call it. And God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply. What does that say to me? Both man and woman, the marriage, they were given this mandate as what some people say like kings, priests, and prophets, not the office of that. That doesn't mean, oh, can I change my business card now to prophet? No, not the office, but as a prophetic, priestly, king role between God and his creation. But even though they both receive the mandate, they will have different roles that complement each other to take care of that mandate. And for God's glory in Christ, before God even made the woman, he first made the man, told him to work and to keep, protect. And then God commanded the man about what they're to eat and what they're not to eat. Now, let's be careful here. That does not mean that God does not speak to women through his word. But God, my wife can read the Bible. She doesn't have to have me dictating it and interpreting it for her. She can have her own devotionals in the house. But I do have a pastoral role there, where I pastor my wife in the truth. I pastorally, not as a dictator, I pastorally point her to Christ with her own struggles. So we're providers, protectors, pastors, provider, protectors, shepherds, men. And how does that reflect God? Pastor, provider, protector. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want because he's my provider, not just my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures because he's my shepherd and my provider. He leads me beside still waters. Peace, he's keeping me. He restores my soul. He leads me to the path of righteousness for his name's sake. He's pastorally pointing me to, taking me into righteousness. Even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, you know why I don't fear? Because my protector is with me. Therefore, I embrace those roles as a man in my home and in the church, everywhere, because I want to allude and reflect to the God who is the provider, pastor, protector. And wife is helpmate. This word for help is used 21 times in the Old Testament, mostly to describe God as help, only because of our humanistic classism. We don't like the word help, as that's like, in the soap operas, the woman that just cleans and wears a little, thing. If somebody's looked at like less in our feudalistic classist mindset, but if helping somebody with their function, if that makes them less, then be careful how many scriptures speaks of God as our helper. Does that make him less? No. And God is our help. He is our refuge and strength, very present help in trouble. For you have been my help in the shadow of your wings. I will sing for your joy. My wife is that help. She's not going to compete with my role. She's going to complementarily help. And which is not really mate, but there are two words in the Hebrew, so act like that's the mate part. But the second word, it means kind of opposite, which does not mean that she's fighting against me, but she's not competing with me. It's like two gears complementing me. And of course, when we're given that blessing ordinance to multiply, obviously, we just need to know a little bit of anatomy. Women, for the first 9 months, who is feeding that baby? Who is nurturing that baby? Well, my daughter right now is married. I'm a granddad now. She's 22 weeks along. When someone says, you're going to be a granddad, I always correct them and say, whoa, 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 whoa. So when that child becomes a human, I'll be a granddad? I'm already a granddad. Yeah. And then when the baby's born, my daughter's going to produce milk and keep nurturing that baby, but it's nothing she does alone, and it's complementary because you know why? I'm providing for my wife. She's providing for the baby. It's complementary. You see that? And she's a nurturer. How is God our nurturer? Look at this. Psalms, look at Isaiah. And something I love about this, I think the right way to think about this, I have 7 minutes. I'm going to make those minutes count, y'all. I think the right way to think about this, God is not scratching his anthropomorphic head saying, what can I use as an illustration in creation to compare to me? Oh, a woman. Yeah, I'm like a woman who takes care of her baby. I found an illustration. No. Our God's not reactive, is he? I believe what these texts teach us is that he created women to reflect those parts of him. He didn't find them by happenstance to find a good sermon illustration. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel, who have been born by me from before your birth, carried from the womb, even to your old age I am he, and to gray hairs I will carry you. I have made, and I will bear, I will carry, I will save. Oh, she consoles, sympathizes. Yes, I console, I sympathize, but God compares himself. And we see, therefore the Holy Spirit's a woman. I don't know if you have that. We have that in Latin America, where now there's a woman too. God, feminine God, people are trying to argue for. No, see, that's called the fallacy of the false translation, actually. Therefore, because God is not made in the women's image. The woman is made in God's image. You're going backwards by saying, therefore God's a woman? No, a woman reflects those aspects of God because God was first reflecting those. And that's why it's important to say God's just not looking for an illustration. Wow, you can see this, so we embrace this. There's so much more I could say about this, but just think about when they come together, and the marriage is that one flesh covenant, and it's like two of these gears that are making one movement for the glory of Christ in his church. Oh, wow. Therefore, both identity and the roles we embrace do not compete, but rather complement each other. And I already spoke to you about how that points to Christ and his church. Now, we have to undo the family to undo this understanding of biblical gender. And after Simone de Beauvoir, The Death of the Family by David Cooper, you had another one, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. Was written to these series of all trying to topple the family. I have a lot of quotes from that, but let me just end with this. You may say, and then, of course, Marx, he said that the binary is this, those who have capital and those who don't, property and don't. Well, today they're using the same system, but they're saying, let's look at everybody who lives in a majority or has a majority and put the opposite on the bottom. And then now they all have subjective pathos values. Therefore, if Jesus was here today, he would protect all of their values against the privileged values of those on top. Everything good and bad is seen only through a Marxist lens, not biblical lens. That's why you have the woke Jesus images, the churches with the woke this, woke that, because they've bought into this. That Jesus, of course, he would protect the subjective values of those who are in the minority on all these cases. And then Paulo Freire says, therefore, our job as educators is to wake people up of the inherent love for privilege against those that's within them. They have to be made aware of or awoke from that, and to raid against that, what they have in there. Well, so you'll end up getting more and more fluidity that brings us into a classless, binary-less society. And what you do is you use art is one of the main things you use to get that. Not only do you start saying that art, everything is subjective and beauty, but you need to revolt against art, because art is what you use to teach these mindsets. People are objects, and then art has to rebel against anything that has symmetry, design, inherent meaning. And this tape with a banana and instructions for how high it should be on the wall was sold for $6.2 million a few years ago. To show, and then that's not only that what you have to do to rebel against it, you have to do what's called death works, which you can see here. This urinary device is called fount, to teach that urinate in a urinary and water coming out of a fountain. What's the difference? Well, there's no inherent meaning or usefulness, purpose, so you decide which one you want. And then this very offensive one that was made in 1987, which you can read, I'm not going to say it. This guy urinated in a glass and put a crucifix in it and took a picture. And this is to desacralize, to take out the sacred, to push people away from that. And I have 1 minute, so I wasn't going to go into... Okay, let me just finish with this then, all right? Now, all right, this is it, right? People saw this coming, and I don't know if many people paid attention to it. And I think it's best for us to pay attention to this, not to all's lost. The sky's not falling, brothers and sisters. I have brothers here, actually, my sister, my daughter back there. The sky's not falling. Christ is king. Christ is king. The sky's not falling. But I think sometimes that chaos, like we read at the beginning, kind of shows us, we need to be a little bit more diligent, at least. And I was just with a group of a 50,000 community population of Mennonites in Chihuahua, Mexico, 2 weeks ago. And it's funny, wow, they're so ordered. They have the biggest businesses. They have everything. They have nicest homes. And there's a whole group of them that have zero gospel. They don't even know the gospel anymore. But they're living morally right lives. See what can happen there? It's the essence of the gospel. We cannot assume our children just understand it. The next generation understands it. So, you know the Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan. Well, I don't know how many know that C.S. Lewis, and again, I don't agree with everything C.S. Lewis wrote. I used to be very much not and very happy with him until I've read some more biographies on his life and found out that a lot of what we know about him, his beliefs, were from his first years as a believer, and he renounced a lot of them. So I said, okay, good. I don't feel so much conviction quoting him then. But I wonder how many people have written the Pilgrim's Regress that he wrote. That is fascinating. Instead of the Pilgrim's Progress, he left his parents' faith to come back to his own, only to come back. That's why it's called the Pilgrim's Regress. And it's kind of like allegorical, like the Pilgrim's Progress, but the guy's name is not Christian. It's John, if I remember right. And on his trip to go away from his parents' belief about a landlady, which is God, metaphorically in this. He's trying to find these islands with these brown girls. That's why this book also, it can be understood as a little bit racist, so as people are careful with it, but he's trying to be very metaphoric. And on the way, he gets captured by the spirit of the age. Notice, think what he's thinking through. I need to go away from my parents' faith, and I get caught up by the spirit of the age. And this is written halfway through the last century. He was seeing it a lot more clear than most people, I bet. John is captured by a giant called the Spirit of the Age and is imprisoned. The jailer brings him food and tries to convince him that it's the same as something filthy. For example, the jailer serves John milk and tells him, isn't that good? Yeah, well, it's no different than cow sweat or urine. Since they are all secretions, any distinction between milk and other secretions is due to custom, like we would say social constructs or aesthetics. There's no inherent difference. It's what you put on it. So you like that milk? It's urine or milk. It's the same thing. It's feces. No? Well, they all come out of a cow. What's the difference? See exactly what's going on in art? Now, John had been in the pit shorter time than any of the others, and at these words, something seemed to snap at his head, and he gave a great sigh and suddenly spoke in a loud, clear voice. Thank heaven, now at last I know that you're talking nonsense. What do you mean, said the jailer, wheeling around upon him. You are trying to pretend that unlike things are like. You are trying to make us think that milk is the same sort of thing as sweat or dung. And pray, what difference is there except by custom? Are you a liar or only a fool that you see there's no difference between what nature casts out as refuse and that which she stores up as food? And then they continue to have a conversation. Oh, nature, you're trying to talk about the landlady like God? And he says, well, I don't know. I just know, because this is a part of his journey where he doesn't come to that faith, but he's starting to realize it's all a lie. He goes, I don't know nothing about that, shouted John after him. I am talking of what happens. Milk does not feed calves, and milk does feed calves, and dung does not. Milk, urine, feces, it's all the same. Nothing intrinsic. Doesn't that kind of remind us of what's going on today? Piss Christ. Jesus Christ. He's the fount of living water. Urinary, piss. It's all the same thing. There's no difference. And if you produce art that tries to push that, you will not get in my gallery. You are a retrograde, close-minded bigot. All art today has to be something that challenges the status quo, show the rebellion. And you go to Manhattan, you go to the art gallery, and you see a dot, and everybody's with their little martinis. Wow. And you come in and say, what's that dot? Oh, goodness, this is a simpleton. And you don't realize that the person saying that's just a dot, that's the child saying the emperor's not wearing clothes. Shh. Yes, he is. We all fall in the emperor's not wearing clothes anymore. And that's why when everything can be a work of art, art knows no normative limits or criteria. Objective standards of beauty are democratized to a vanishing point. It also has no given end or telos. Art becomes nothing more than a rebellious performative gesture. It does not elevate man. It puts rather to his insignificance. Art has to promote this. And let me just show you this. It doesn't matter what's true or not. I debated 2019, right before I'll just show you this, in the National University of Columbia with two of their professors. So I brought this Christian guy who's not Christian scientist, a scientist who is a Christian, who has his PhD from Harvard and is a geneticist. And we went down there, and he mopped the floor with them. It was sad. I mean, I had to deal with my pride. I was like, oh, man, good luck, guys. And you know what they did? They got up and didn't even try and give a defense. They said, the white imperialists have come down to kill the indigenous of Colombia, and you're going to keep letting them. And then this happened. Which, I'm sorry, there should be audio. But anyways, imagine them yelling. This went on for 20 minutes. And security had to get us out. What's true is, are these guys promoting the old way, or are they helping us to ring the revolution a new way? Nothing else is true. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So I would like just to end with this. I think we're asking the wrong question. We do not start by asking, who am I? We're asking the wrong question. The question is, because you're asking a creature, who am I? I need to ask, who is God? And he has revealed himself. And then he tells me who I am. And that doesn't make me feel much better. I'm a wretched sinner. And then he gives me hope in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Instead of which one of these, I believe that we are made in God's image. We are made ethical, moral beings. We're made relational beings in covenant with God, and we have horizontal covenants as well that I think reflect that. We are rational beings, but all needs to submit what God has revealed. The triune God is the ultimate credibility, the ultimate author, the ultimate source for all authority, for his glory is all. He has revealed his word. So I take my reasoning that he's given me and I submit all thoughts captive to the obedience of Christ. He has written his law in my heart and in his word. And I submit my feelings. I submit my subjective experience all to what he has revealed. And yes, there is authority. He has given authority to the individual conscience. That's why Luther says, what? My conscience is held captive by the word of God. No matter what the state, whatever what the church says, at the end of the day, my conscience first in front of the Lord. According to his word, the family, church, state, and none of them give together. But I have failed. That relationship's been broken with God because of my sin. And also, Romans 1, Ephesians 4 teach what we call the noetic effects of sin, that my mind has been made vain, and in Ephesians 4, it's been darkened by sin, and my heart has been darkened by sin, the rational and the moral, the heart and the mind, and there is no hope. I believe in total depravity. That means that all parts of what makes me human have been smeared with sin. There's no part of me that can save the other part of me. I don't need a reformation. I need a new nature. And that's why God, the Son, came down and he lived that perfect, righteous life, just life. And now through faith, he takes on the cross, my injustice, and he is damned, according to Galatians 3, in my place. That way I can be blessed in him, through faith in him. And that's my only hope. The gospel, according to Marx, is a false, demonic gospel at the end of the day, because it doesn't save me. And now, in Christ, I'm being made to the perfect image of Christ. And please let me just end with this one verse here. Yes, there is injustice. Yes, we should not be apathetic to something happening. But remember, at the end of the day, Abel's blood in Genesis was crying out to God for justice. And God says, hey, why is your brother's blood crying out to me? Well, there is a better blood that cries out justification through faith by grace. A better one, a better blood. That's Jesus's. Because if we all yell out if we all say no, justice, right, all past wrongs, every single one of us, we can just go right now to the lake of fire. Everything above hell is grace. Because that's what we all deserve. I deserve it. I'm nobody's victim. I'm a victimizer. But I don't have to call out with Abel and say I'm a victim. I'm going to call out to Christ for that better blood than his that justifies sinners like me. And this is what we're fighting for, brothers and sisters, brothers here, sorry. This is what it is. It is the gospel that saved you. Let's take it to the next generation to save them and reject everything that tries to take, in Spanish I like the word estiércol, because it is waste come from a human's backside, but it's a word you can use behind a pulpit. Okay, whatever that word is in English, dung, thank you. It's dung with a little angel's halo over it, covered in chocolate. It's all dung. And Christ's glory, that's the only thing that's worth it. So thank you all so much. I went over 6 minutes. And please, this gospel's so wonderful, isn't it? Isn't it so wonderful? That we're willing to give all that somebody else can hear it instead of this fake, false, Marxist gospel that just promotes more death. And may the Lord and every one of your families and churches help, bless you and keep you to protect the transmission of the faith that's been handed down. The only one that saves. God bless you all. Thank you so much.